Really?
Everybody take your seats. Thank you so much for having me. It's great being here talking about springtime hive management for top bar hives. I love spring. Spring is a fantastic time of the year. It's that time of year that's full of hope. Perhaps you're a new beekeeper and you're nervously anticipating your very first hive of bees. Maybe you're a more experienced beekeeper and you're also nervously anticipating the beginning of spring and finding out if your hives have survived the winter. Maybe you're a mentor or a teacher, and you're also excited about the new year and the new connections and beekeepers that you get to meet and to share your love of beekeeping with. Whoever you are, it just so happens that spring is that time of year where beekeeping is full of great surprises. It doesn't matter how well you follow the instructions, the bees will continue to surprise you. So I'm going to give you kind of a groundwork of how to do springtime hive maintenance for top bar hives, but you will be surprised, and that's fine because it's a learning experience. First thing, I'm going to briefly cover hiving your packages into a top bar hive. Here is an example of what your package of bees might come in. This could come in the mail, it could come from Craig, it might come from somebody else. First thing you do when you get to that hive is you make sure that you have all of your equipment ready on the standby. I like to have a handy dandy knife, I like to have some sugar water, and that's pretty much all you need for this process. First thing you do when you bring that package home is you spray it down with sugar water. And really, the only purpose that serves is to keep the bees happy while you're manhandling them, woman-handling, whatever. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to take this package and you're going to give it a good shake. And that's just to bump all those bees onto the bottom of the hive. You're going to take your knife and there's going to be a feeding jar right here. This is cherry pie filling. Do not feed your bees cherry pie filling. This is just the biggest can I happen to have in my pantry. You're going to pry that out, and you're going to take this and you're going to put it in the back of your top bar hive. Balanced on a couple of sticks, so that the bees can get in and finish all the feed in that bottle. Right there on the back of the hive. Next, you're going to take the queen cage and you're going to wiggle it out of the top of the package. There's probably going to be quite a few bees still hanging on here. She has a wonderful smell. They're very enticed by that and they want to be by her. So you're going to have to brush those off, take an assessment. Does she look good? Okay, she looks great. Let's install her. And you're probably going to have a candy plug. So you're going to have to take your knife. There's going to be a plug on this. Gently just pop that out. Keep your finger over it so that queen doesn't crawl out. I don't know if that's happened to anybody out here. Insert your plug, your candy plug in there, and then in the front entrance of your hive, on a top bar, the entrance is on one side or the other. You're going to press this queen cage between two combs of beeswax. Make sure she has air so she doesn't suffocate. And you put that into the hive. Meanwhile, this package, you just put that right in the back of the hive. You don't have to shake it in there or anything. Just lay it right there back in the back of the hive. Close up the hive, come back in 2 to 3 days later, make sure that queen has been released, that she's laying, and then pull out that package at the same time. So that's how you install bees into a top bar hive.
Do you just lay it like flat or up?
Just like that.
Like that, okay.
There are several types of top bar hives out there. Some of them are deeper than others, and you can sit it up like that, but usually it fits laying down just like that. Any other questions? Yes, what's your question?
If you're new and don't have hive from don't have comb from last year, you just let them start building?
So the question is, if you're a new beekeeper and you don't have existing comb, what do you do? Well, I've been in that position where I've had quite a few hives. I didn't have the comb, I didn't really have the community around, and so you can actually just tie that queen cage right directly to the bar. But look at us, we have a great community with a lot of great beekeepers. Look around for people that are top bar beekeepers and ask if you can have 2 combs of empty brood. Or, two empty honeycombs to start your hive with. That's also important in the top bar hive because it gets your hive growing in a correct pattern. These will follow a pattern. So let's talk about spring hive maintenance and what we do in a beehive. And we'll start out by talking briefly about the beekeeper's calendar. If your hive has survived the winter, at some point it has dwindled down to maybe about 5,000 worker bees and a queen, and they are rotating around the hive in a big hive cluster, eating their resources that they have set in a specific pattern last fall. In about late January, early February, the elm bloom happens here, and they're starting to get pollen. This is followed by the willow, the fruit trees. The temperatures are warming up. The queen is starting to lay more and more, and your hive is undergoing rapid expansion. When you get in your hive, it's kind of a fine line. You don't want to get in your hive too early because you risk breaking the propolis seal. The bees have laid a fine little bead of propolis along every single one of those top bars, and once you pop that seal, it's very difficult for them to rebuild that again. You can also interrupt that cluster of bees, and you can risk freezing the brood. But on the other hand, if you wait too late to check your bees, you risk losing half your bees to a swarm. Usually my rule of thumb is if the temperatures are consistently around 60 degrees and up, I'll start regularly checking my hives. And there are a few things that you want to look for. Quickly, if you don't know what a swarm is, that means that the old queen has left the hive with a portion of the worker bees and possibly some drones, and they are out looking for a new home. In this original hive, there is a virgin queen, and she will go on her mating flight, return to the hive. This is, if you think of a beehive as a being, this is the way of a being reproducing and making a second being.
She doesn't take the whole swarm with her?
No, she only takes a portion of the bees. There's actually a great book by Tom Seeley, Honeybee Democracy, that's really great to check out to find out the ins and outs about that. And I believe he's coming to New Mexico to speak, so look out for those dates. So when you look in your hive, there's a few things that you're going to be looking for. First off, you're going to look to find out, just like Phil said, if your queen is laying. Are there eggs? Are there larvae? Is it capped brood? You're also going to find out, is there capped drone brood? And are there drones walking around on a comb? Another thing you're going to be looking for is pollen. Is there enough pollen? The queen is increasing her laying. Those eggs are emerging as larvae, and larvae are really hungry little piggies. They need huge amounts of pollen to complete their transformation into worker bees. So you want to make sure and look to make sure that there's enough pollen storage in the honey storage area, and that they have a nice bead of pollen above the brood chamber of the hive. Another thing that you're looking for is checking to see if your hive is ready to swarm. When you pull out a comb, you will find swarm cells right along the edges of this. They're not going to be in the middle, they're going to be right along the edges of your comb right there. So that's something to look for in a hive, and we'll talk about what to do with that a little bit later, if you see those swarm cells.
What does a swarm cell look like?
A swarm cell can start out looking kind of like a little cup initially, and as it grows and matures, it'll start looking kind of like a little peanut that hangs down.
And that's a queen?
That is a queen.
She needs about 3 times the space of a normal one.
Yeah, that's usually why she's along those edges, so she has a lot of room for her big body. Yeah. So once you have gone into your hive and you assessed how it is, you've got a few management techniques in the belt. The first one of those management techniques is you need to rotate your old comb. This is what you need to do in the springtime. Every time a queen lays an egg, that egg becomes a larva. Then the larva creates a cocoon around itself. It defecates in that cocoon, and it emerges as a worker bee. And if you imagine that this is a cell in the hive, she leaves behind that cocoon, this coffee filter, and the worker bees will clean that out as best as they can, and then the queen will lay another egg, and then another cocoon will be left behind. And those cocoons will still start building up, bigger and bigger, thicker and thicker, and these layers of cocoon are full of excrement as best as they've cleaned it out. And this really is a breeding ground for disease and pathogens. So you want to rotate this old comb to the back of the hive and harvest it out as the honey storage. One rule of thumb is if you have, say this is some old brood comb, if you hold it up to the sun and you can't see sunlight streaming through that, that means it's time to rotate that out of your hive. And the way you do that is you can just move it back to the honey storage area and then harvest it. Another hive management technique that you have at your hand is hive spacing or stretching of the hive. In a typical top bar hive, I have the entrance to the hive on this side, right down here. And usually the bees like to put 1 or 2 combs of honey right by the entrance. And then it is the brood chamber, and then honey storage after that. In this time of rapid expansion, the bees are bringing in honey and pollen, and at some point they're going to run out of room. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the entire top bar is going to be full. It just means that there is a honey barrier. And the way you deal with that, you work with this throughout the spring, you start adding spacing within that hive to prevent them from feeling like they've run out of room and it's time to swarm. So in this hive, I've labeled my honey a yellow, I've labeled my brood pink, and then there's honey after that. And the places, let me see where I can see. The places that you want to put spacing is, rule of thumb, you want to put it between every single honeycomb. You can put a spacer between a honey and the brood. You can put a spacer between the honey at the very front of the hive and the brood chamber. And you can even put space within the brood chamber itself. These spacers I'm using are just empty top bars that I'm fitting in. Here in the springtime, you don't want to space your brood too far. Otherwise, again, they risk a chance of freezing because we can still have some temperature plunges. So you can space, 3 or 4 combs of brood together, put a spacer between that, have another 3 to 4 combs of brood after that, and then a spacer after that.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes?
Do you put anything on your spaces, like do you put beeswax or anything to, for example, related to it?
That's a good question. The question is, do you put beeswax? What do you put on your top bars to keep them growing straight? I have quite a few hives, and I have had old growth, so I depend on, they have a beeswax buildup already, so they already have a pattern that they follow. But if you have a brand new hive, it's great to put lovely little, what's the word for it? Cleats on every single one of those bars. Spline. Thank you, appreciate that. Which, there is a top bar hive back there that TJ Carr has designed that shows that spline on those top bars. So, and your third management technique is splitting a hive. You can expand that hive as much as you want, but at a certain point, those bees are really going to be inclined to want to swarm. So you really need to check your hives pretty often during the springtime to make sure that they are not thinking about swarming and they're building those little swarm cells. Once they do build those swarm cells, that's your cue. You need to split that hive immediately. And splitting in the hive is basically just swarming the hive for them. So when you do that, when you see some of those queen cells at the bottom of these combs, the way you split the hive, this is the original hive. I happen to have a new hive here that's empty. This is not one of my regular hives. This is a hive I use for trap out, so it's a shorter size. Just pretend it's a large hive. What I do is I take 2 combs of mostly capped brood and all the bees that are on those bars, and I put them in the new hive. I also sandwich that with 2 bars of honey and all the bees that are on that honey. I also put in this hive the queen, and then I might brush some more bees into this hive as well. And I brush the bees off of the brood comb into this. And I close it up, move this hive, and I leave this hive alone for a few weeks while they're building the new queen.
Oh, so you put the old, I'm sorry, you put the new queen there?
So I'm basically swarming the hive for them, and when swarm, the old queen leaves the hive. So I'm swarming the queen into the new hive.
So you're taking her, putting her in there?
Mhm. That's right. And I want mostly capped brood because all those capped brood are going to emerge and be the worker bees.
And then the swarm cells, you're leaving the old.
Yes.
Could you do it the other way? Could you put the new stuff?
You could do it the other way, but this original old hive needs all the resources it can have. It needs that workforce that's out foraging to make the really heavily concentrated royal jelly. It takes a lot of resources to make that royal jelly. So if I swarm this hive, they don't have those workers, they don't have the resources to make that royal jelly. DJ.
How far away do you move the queen?
So this is one of those questions, if you ask any beekeeper, they have a different answer. I don't move this that far. I know other people like to move this a few miles, but since in my mind I'm swarming this hive and I'm moving comb from the brood nest that has mostly capped brood, and usually the nurse bees are on that comb. So some of them will find that original hive, but not all of them. Was there another question?
It was about that,
Yeah.
same thing. What do you mean some of them won't find it?
So when I split this hive and I swarm them for them, I take brood that is mostly capped, and on that mostly capped brood is mostly nurse bees, and they've never gone out on foraging flights, so they wouldn't be able to determine where the old hive is. Some of them have, and some of them will go back to that original hive, but I'm gonna try my luck and hope that most of them do not return.
So once they're moved over there, the forager bees they're just gonna wake up in the morning and go out and know that they're in a different place because the sun is in a different place?
Well, I'm doing this in the daylight. Question is, what about the foragers? Do they move to this new hive? No, the foragers, when I do the split, are out in the field.
Oh, okay.
So, yes, question?
Just a comment.
Comment.
If you split, take your new hive and turn the entrance 90 degrees, okay? Yeah, then they get there and they go, oh, what that, where's that?
Yeah, great observation.
So what did he think?
So,
Cause just enough confusion for them to restart and say, okay, I'm in a different place now. I need to re-memorize where home is at. And so they will reorient to the new location where the hive is, in theory. Some of them will remember it and they may go back to the old hive. You've got enough in the new hive to get it started, jumpstart that, and it'll take off.
later in the season, you're going to make larger splits because in a topper hive, you want 12 to 14 bars full of honey and brood and pollen to survive the winter. So only in April do you make a 4-bar split. Later in the season, you're going to increase the numbers of the bees that you make in your split. Any other questions on that? Yes?
When a hive swarms, how far will it usually go?
Not too far, actually. I don't know, does anybody else know an exact number for that?
When the bees first leave the hive, they're going to probably locate in almost the first tree they find. And it'll be between 6 feet and 50 feet high in the air. Of course, you've got to find a tree 50 feet high. That's his from Mexico. But I've seen them 30 feet in the air, and you're just going to look at them and go, good luck. If they're below that, then you can collect them and capture them. But they're probably just going to go about 100 yards. Then they're going to send the scouts out. And the scouts don't want to be close to the old hive because then they're in competition with the guys they just left. So they're probably gonna go half a mile and find a new house and make a new home. But you got about 6 hours to the next morning to capture that swarm.
And sometimes much less than that.
Yeah,
Sometimes the
I've
scouts have already
had
been
phone
out. they
calls
pretty
and I've
much-
gotten it, and they says, they left 20 minutes ago.
Yeah, and it was just a half hour by the time you
Yeah,
got the call.
yeah. Yeah, you don't know, you're gonna get the phone call, but you don't know when that hive actually swarmed versus the first, somebody noticed it and gave you a phone. The other side of it is to find out and try to make sure that it's not black, yellow jackets or wasps, because I got called for that too.
I believe that,
You can save yourself a lot of time with swarms. If somebody calls you 10 o'clock in the morning, those bees are gonna move because they emanate early morning. Say, I tell them, call me back at 5 o'clock. I'm serious. Call you back in the afternoon, the bees will be there. Otherwise, in the morning, forget it. They'll move sometimes 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
They're that long.
I believe at the next Albuquerque meeting, Abq Beeks meeting, swarm catching will be covered. Am I right with that, Carol? Yes, So if you want to know more details, more in-depth details about that topic, make sure you attend the next meeting. So as a quick recap, you guys are going to do a fantastic job installing your packages. I know you are. Also, springtime is the time for rapid expansion in the hive. Space your hive to prevent that overcrowding and that impulse to swarm. Make a split if you need to. And if you have bees and you need to make a split and you don't have a home for them, post it on the Abq Beeks website. I'm sure somebody in this room would love to buy, trade, have your bees. Thank you.